Why is it so delicately balanced? Why does one species getting added to the mix or removed from the mix affect everything else? Well, it largely comes down to symbiotic relationships. It is really hard to find two species in an ecosystem that don't have... Do you know the Kevin Bacon game, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon?
No. I don't play it.
And nobody's ever heard this? Okay, I'm going to tell you this because there's an ecological metaphor, and then you can go to lunch and you can play the Kevin Bacon game with yourself. Name an actor. Go. Anyone?
John Cena.
Okay, I don't even know who that is. Fine. So, that person. That person. That was fantastic. I'm going to look that person up just so I can steal that joke. Whoever that person is... The first question you ask is, have they ever been in a movie with Kevin Bacon? Kevin Bacon's an actor, okay? He used to be hot. Shut up. He was in Footloose, yes. Now I guess he's old because I'm old. And when I was young, he was hot. So anyway, he's been in a lot of stuff. The first question you ask is, was he ever in a movie with Kevin Bacon? And if the answer to that is no, then... Has he ever been in a movie with somebody who's been in a movie with Kevin Bacon? If the answer is yes, then they have 1 degree of Kevin Bacon separation. If he was in a movie with somebody who was in a movie with somebody who was in a movie with Kevin Bacon, then they have 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon separation. Okay? So it's all these, it gets really confusing, it gets complicated. Look it up. Google it. Google, Kevin Bacon, or Bacon score, I forget what they call it. 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, that's it. 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So, interestingly enough, if we look at an ecosystem, and we said that in a single ecosystem, we could look at a single meadow out there. We've got tons of populations, tons of species. I listed, maybe 14 here? 15, something like that? 16, I don't know. There are thousands of species in a meadow. There are thousands of species in a stream, in an anything. Yes, I just hid your slide, sorry. I mean, really thousands. So symbiotic relationships are relationships between 2 different species that are long-term, they're ongoing, they've been multiple generations. They're symbiotic relationships. So, it's kind of like playing the Kevin Bacon game. If we look at any 2 species in a given ecosystem, we say, do they have a direct relationship? Very often the answer is yes. Very often we can find some relationship between them directly. And if they don't have a direct relationship, does either of them have a relationship with another species that has a relationship with that species? And the answer is usually yes. We usually can't get more than 1 or 2 degrees away within an ecosystem. They're that tightly connected. That's kind of crazy. So what that means is all these species are kind of holding hands. Oh, kumbaya, let's sing. But you people don't even actually know the song, do you? You just know the expression as an insult, don't you?
I think I might know.
Oh, I'm so glad. We sang it in Girl Scouts when I was little. Anyway, okay, you can stop now, because I can't shout over you. In any ecosystem, we seldom get more than 2 degrees away. If 2 species don't have a direct relationship, they usually have sort of a 1 degree removed relationship. Well, because of that, and these have evolved over thousands of years, hundreds of years, millions of years in some cases, because they're over many generations. Now, how long is a generation? What is a generation? Now, note that I asked a question, I asked this question, what is a generation, not how long is a generation? Oh. So generally, a generation is usually defined as the length of time it takes from the time an individual is born until they can reproduce, have babies. So, how long is a generation? Well, it depends on what species we're talking about. For humans, typical generational length is usually given as about 20 years. Humans can reproduce before that, and lots of humans reproduce after that. But if we average it all out around the world globally, it comes out to about 20 years. If we're talking about bacteria, how long might a generation be? It might be hours in some species. In some species, it might be a day. If we're talking about rabbits, or what if we're talking about rats? It might be a couple months. We could see a new generation every couple months. So, whatever the length of the generation is, and that varies from species to species, symbiotic relationships have developed over multiple generations. This isn't just, okay, I have a friend, and she is a really smart person, and she is a giant sucker for those like interspecies friendship internet memes. Like, if there's a picture going around the internet of a dog that took in a baby squirrel, you can bet she's going to forward it to me, because just nothing warms her heart like dogs nursing squirrels and, this owl who adopted a mouse and isn't eating it. Really? Okay. The deer who made best friends with their cat. Okay. This is not a symbiotic relationship. This is not multi-generational. This is not long-term. This is one weird individual deer that doesn't get that this cat is not its friend. This is one individual dog, weird, sad dog with very low prey drive that doesn't get that it should eat the squirrel. That's not a symbiotic relationship. That's a one-off. Symbiotic relationships are multiple generations. So, you all... we'll talk about that a little later. You got symbiotes in this room with you. Symbiotes. Symbiotes, sometimes we'll talk about symbiotes as any one of the species that's in a symbiotic relationship is a symbiote. So they come in different flavors. But the big things, the things that you have to know, okay, is that it's two different species. If it's the same species, it's not a symbiotic relationship. That's just interspecies whatever. And they're multiple generations. So I show a couple pictures of symbiotic relationships here. Yes, that ant is licking that bug's butt. Ew. That's because that bug is producing a sticky sweet substance called honeydew. It basically drinks plant sap with its little piercing sucking mouth part, kind of like a mosquito. It sticks a needle in the plant, it sucks up plant juice, and what it sort of pees out, it's got two little spouts on the back of its body, and what pops out of those spouts is a condensed liquid, so these ants will actually protect these little bugs. They farm them, basically. They protect them, they move them around, and in exchange they get to drink their pee. Fantastic. Multi-generational, two different species. It is a symbiotic relationship. Okay. There are 5 major types of symbiotic relationships. I'm going to say that 2 of them you're relatively familiar with. These symbiotic relationships are the reason that we can look at thousands and thousands upon species in an ecosystem, and we're hard-pressed to find 2 species that aren't at least 1 degree separated. Those are the 2 I think you mostly have a handle on. Predation, you know what predators are. Now, what you may not know is how those predation relationships change ecosystems. We saw it in the film that you watched on Monday when I was out. About the what? Yeah, the wolves. I can't wolf howl. You noticed that. Those wolves, those predators, changed the ecosystem. And we're going to talk about how. Parasites are the other one that you're familiar with. Who here has heard of a parasite? Who here has heard of a specific parasite that we studied in class connected to diseases? Good, good. We're going to talk about more parasites, and some of you have been doing your own study on parasites. Do you get parasites anywhere else in school? Have you talked about parasites in a science class anywhere up to now? Huh? No? Okay. Okay, doesn't seem like it. So the other kinds of symbiotic relationships, I mean, competition you could figure out, but you probably don't get all the implications of competition immediately. And these last two you've probably never heard of. So, we are going to briefly sum up what these relationships are, but that's not really our concern. Our concern is really how they change the system, how they put pressure on one species. Do you remember what I said? If I had a real honest-to-goodness goal for this whole unit for you, it would be that you would understand how well an ecosystem works. You could understand how an ecosystem works so well that if I gave you unlimited funds, you could build one. You could predict how every species would influence every other species. You could build a computer simulation. You could write the code and build a computer simulation. You could write a video game that would realistically represent an ecosystem. That would be cool. Actually, the Sims games, does anybody still play those? Do those still exist? Yes? Okay. Because I think those are mostly based on human culture, but you could do an eco-Sims game where you would build an ecosystem. Okay, we are going to start off with predation, just a little bit about predation. So, predation! The slide's up on the board. And I overheard everybody. Everybody gets this. Predators capture, kill, and consume their prey. Period. End of sentence. You know that. You can figure that out. If I show you a bunny and a coyote, you can pick out the predator. If I show you a whole group of species, you can probably pick out the predators among them. They tend to have pointy teeth. Predation relationships drive population size. And we talked about that a little bit in the last chapter. We'll do a little bit more graphing with that later. When you have more of a species, prey species, then that predator species tends to do well. When the predator species does really well, the numbers on the prey species drop. So we tend to see those cycles where predation affects ecosystems because population sizes for each population tend to fluctuate based on how well the species they're in relationship with do. So what happened, for instance, in Yellowstone when they eliminated wolves? What happened to elk numbers? They went way up. Now, that's one other species. But if we're talking about the whole, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon thing with elk, who would have predicted that elk were related to beavers? I sure wouldn't have. I have a degree in biology and I worked in watershed protection for years. I would not have predicted that. Well, they're not directly, but elk eat willow and beavers eat willow. Oh. Oh, wait, then they have a direct relationship, which is competition. They're competing for the same food source. They don't have a direct predatory relationship, but they have a different relationship. It's all connected. Predation, number one, is a good regulator of population size. But these predator relationships also drive other changes in the ecosystem. We have a nice mountain lion there. Predation is also a driver in the evolution of species. Bad predators don't get enough calories to stay alive or to make babies or to make, the clipbirds. The clipbirds were vegetarian predators. They were herbivores. Bad predators don't pass on their genes. Natural selection favors effective predators. Natural selection also favors organisms that can get the heck away from their predators. Speaking of predators, did anybody hear the news about the gateway clipper over last weekend? What did they find on the gateway clipper? A bobcat. A bobcat on the third deck. I know. The crew was going through getting the ship ready to board passengers, and they have to check every deck to make sure there are no stowaways from the last trip, I guess. And when they got to the third deck, they got to the top and went, "Oh!" And they closed the door and went back down, and they reported to the rest of the crew, "There's a bobcat up there." And they're like, "No, there's not!" No, there is. "Oh my God, there is." So they had to call animal control, and animal control had to come trap the bobcat off the gateway clipper before they could board passengers. Oh my God. I would so have loved to have been a passenger. Like, I would have volunteered for anything. Like, I will go bait the bobcat. I'll go call, here, kitty, kitty, I don't care. I just want to see the bobcat. Here, kitty, 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 kitty. Surrounding hillsides. The interesting thing about Pittsburgh and how Pittsburgh develops is that there are portions of land that are undevelopable. Despite how good humans have gotten at hanging buildings off of stupid hillsides, there are still portions of Pittsburgh where they haven't managed that because it's so slopey. So there are these weird patches of steep wilderness interspersed with this urban environment. And number one, I mean, as humans have spread out and sort of taken more land, competed with species for land, a lot of predators have moved into urban environments. I mean, we have eastern coyotes in downtown Cleveland. There are eastern coyotes in the middle of Pittsburgh. There are eastern coyotes in Columbus, in the city. They're pretty adaptable. Out west, they have mountain lions that show up in Boulder and in Denver and in cities, in parks, because they use corridors within those urban areas. So, you know, some of these big predators are pretty smart, pretty adaptable critters, and you've got corridors in Pittsburgh that are undeveloped. The other thing about bobcats, who's studying bobcats? Somebody is. So you don't have to tell me. But anyway, one of the primary habitat features that bobcats require is steep, cliffy areas because they tend to, like cliffy, rocky areas for having bebes and raising their bebes because those are easily defensible. Same reason humans used to build castles on top of hills in medieval Europe, because they're easily defensible. Bobcats like cliffy, wild areas where they can have their babies and they can see what's coming. So yeah, bobcat on the Gateway Clipper. Let's go for a boat ride. Oh, that hurt. Okay, so good predators are more likely to succeed. Adaptable predators, such as bobcats, who can get onto the Gateway Clipper without a ticket, are more likely to succeed. Coyotes, who can, thrive in downtown Cleveland, are much more likely to succeed. You have to be good. You have to be smart. You have to learn. You have to be adaptable. And the ones who are good and smart and learn and are adaptable pass on their genes. So predation drives evolution of species. It drives the shape of the ecosystem. I mean, the other big question I had for you that I had you write down at the beginning of your notes was, what decides, what shapes the ecosystem we see? Why are there these 100 species and not these 100 species? It's all down to relationships. It's all down to relationships. So the other thing is those prey species on the other end of it, they're not just defenseless. Prey fights back. Can anybody see the prey species in that lower picture? It is not a cactus, it's a tomato plant. I can't zoom in. Right there. That is not a stink bug. That is a tomato hornworm. And one year I had an infestation of them in my garden. They are a green worm. Who here has spent time in a garden around tomato plants? I love the smell of broken tomato plants on my hands. Some people hate it. I love that smell. Tomato hornworms look exactly like a tomato stem. It's eerie. They also look really great when you smash them under your foot after they've consumed half your tomato plants in one morning. They're really hard to see. Birds have a hard time picking them out because they look just like the tomato stems. If you're easy to see, you tend to not pass on your genes. Okay, so, this is more about how these relationships have shaped the species, have shaped the populations, have driven their evolution. Mimicry. Being a good prey animal often means looking like something more dangerous than you are, or more distasteful than you are. And the other one is camouflage. And you all know what camouflage is. It would be ridiculous to even put that on anything. You know what that is. This is like an arms race. It's just like the antibiotics and bacteria. The predator gets better, the prey gets better. The predator gets better, the prey gets better. over the course of multiple generations. Now, when we introduce a predator to an ecosystem that wasn't there before, or we introduce a prey species with no predators, does that change an ecosystem? Oh my gosh, yes. The rabbits in Australia, they introduced rabbits in Australia in 18-something. There were no natural predators. They basically ate the entire country. Like, down to the ground. It was like a plague of locusts. It was biblical in proportion. They chewed up everything that rabbits could chew up, to the point where they introduced a virus to try to kill them. They did a whole bunch of stuff to try to kill off the rabbits because they just had nothing ate them. There was nothing there that looked at a rabbit and went, "Oh, you look tasty." So they just kept multiplying. They kept eating everything. They outcompeted native species. It was terrible. Being a good prey species kind of keeps you in check. You have to be hard to see. You have to be sneaky. You may have to look like something you're not. But the predator species are keeping you in check. And to some degree, your population numbers are keeping them in check. There's one other thing I want to talk about with predation. Toward all of that. When those predators are back in the system, it means that prey species behave differently. They modify their behavior, and that can modify the ecosystem for other animals. In the case of the elk and the wolves in Yellowstone, it meant the willows grew back. It meant there was more willow for the beavers who were previously competing with the elk for those willows. It meant now that there were more willows, there was better habitat on the river, so there were more fish species. It's a whole cascade of effects, all because of one species. What do we call a species that has that big an effect on an ecosystem? I'm going to draw it for you. Keystone species are those species that have a tremendous effect on other species because of that ecology of fear. Let me give you a different example, one we haven't talked about. What are who knows what the Florida Everglades are? Just in the broadest, most general of terms. What is it? It's a big swamp in Florida. Florida sits low. There's a lot of actually groundwater infiltration. There's flow back and forth between groundwater and ocean water. It's kind of a whole different ecosystem down there. The Everglades are, I believe, the largest existing wetland system in the continental U.S. Like, just one wetland system. And wetland systems tend to be pretty diverse, pretty productive. Something has happened in Florida. A predator was introduced in the last 20 years. They are currently estimating that 80%, 8 out of every 10 mammals in the Everglades are gone, have been consumed by this predator. Can you imagine what it would look like if 80% of the mammals out there disappeared in the course of 10 years? That's decimation. That's major ecosystem change. Do you know what the predator was?
The boa.
Well, it's, you know what, and I'm not going to name names specifically. It's python species. So Burmese and ball pythons both. So around here, if you have a python in your house and you let it go, guess what's going to happen to it in January? It's going to die. They aren't from these here parts. They're cold-blooded. They're a conformer. They're not a regulator. They are not adapted to finding, our native snakes know to find places below the frost line. You'll find balls of snakes in old basements and well pits and stuff where they're overwintering, where they're down below frost line. These guys don't know that. They're tropical species. So around here, they get released. They might last, depends on when they're released. If they're released in March, they might last almost a whole year. But they're going to die. They're not going to make it through a winter here. It's a different story in Florida. And the swamps of South Florida were already home to some snake species, some native snake species. Well, these guys are pretty voracious predators, and they get really big. Isn't there a reality show now about snake hunters or something? What is it? No. So these non-native, and interestingly enough, the Burmese python and ball python can interbreed. They can have fertile offspring. They're closely related species. So there are these sort of hybrid python species now in the Everglades. They have put bounties out on these snakes. If you want to finance a summer's worth of work and you're a big game hunter and you want to go to Florida and kill you a bunch of snakes, you can probably sell the meat to restaurants in New York City as ooh, fancy, fancy, and sell the skins to make cowboy boots or some silly thing. I don't know. You can probably pay for your trip. And I think you do get a bounty from the state of Florida when you turn in their heads or something. I don't know. But it's a huge problem. I mean, it's not only a huge problem because people are finding these things under their houses. They're moving into residential areas. So, bye-bye Fifi the poodle who you let out to go to the bathroom. Where's Fifi? I don't know. Oh my God, there's a snake with a lump. Yeah, not good. So yeah, not good, not good. But on top of that, the native ecosystem there has had absolute havoc wreaked on it because of the introduction of two species. And it's done serious damage. It's a non-native species. There is nothing down there that eats pythons. In their native environment, where they come from, I am quite sure something co-evolved with them, and there's something that kills them. I don't know what it is. But there's something. What is it? I don't know. Okay, you're making guesses. That's fine. It could be. Thus far, it does not seem that Florida alligators are catching on, or not in enough numbers. But, a single species can change things radically. Those guys. Vicious. Okay, no, that was, yes, you're right. Thank you for calling me on my use of imprecise language. Warm-blooded. Vicious. Cold-hearted. How's that? Cruel. Merciless. Predators. Like this cute little groundhog who is mercilessly preying on the clover. Are you taking notes? That deer who is merciless. Now, deer actually, if you look at the kind of damage they can do on young trees, they are pretty merciless. That merciless, cruel bunny plowing down the clover. Herbivores are considered predators too. That's still a predator-prey relationship. Because does it meet the definition of predator-prey? Yeah. Are they killing and consuming their prey? Yes. So just like animal prey species have defenses, plants do too. But in the case of plants, they tend to be things like thorns and spikes. Yes. I sat on a cactus once by accident. It was no fun. There's nothing to recommend the experience. And the other thing that plants have are chemicals. Sorry, I'm messing with your slides here. There. Gesundheit. So, plants are also prey species. Their predators just happen to be herbivores. And they do have defense mechanisms. Who here has gone blackberry picking? Wild blackberry picking. Did you come back with scars? I really like farm blackberries, the ones that they plant. You can buy the plants and they're thornless, which is like the most amazing thing ever to me. Because having had jeans torn through, it looked like a razor blade went through my jeans in the blackberry patch. Those canes are nothing to mess around with. If I was an herbivore, there is no way I would take a big mouthful of blackberry. It would hurt. The other thing that plants do very often is they've got what are called secondary compounds, and those are chemicals. Tobacco is actually one. A lot of these secondary compounds humans have sort of co-opted. I don't know if anybody has had the experience, and this is not, I mean, it's not funny because little kids have died, but often little kids will get a hold of an adult's cigarette and chew on it. Children have died. Well, no, the nicotine can kill them if they actually consume the whole thing. But even if they don't, there's tingliness in the lips. Nicotine's a chemical that interacts with body cells. You know, it's addictive for a reason. It changes our brain chemistry, but it also has an effect. So not a lot of animals will eat tobacco leaves because they make their mouths go numb and tingly. Caffeine is my favorite secondary compound. I love it. But yeah, those are defense mechanisms. Okay, in the 7 minutes we have left, I'm going to very quickly get a quiz posted for you.